It had been an exciting day. Katie discovered that a boring morning can turn into an adventure when you find a toy you thought you'd lost. Orbie learned that if you press your nose right up against the window, you leave a steamy imprint. And they both found out that even when you think nothing new is happening, it can be happening right under your nose. Katie and Orbie were having a good time in the front yard. They each had a big scoop of birdseed that they scattered under the little tree. Katie made a pattern with hers, but Orbie just made a pile. Then Orbie noticed a little bird's nest on a branch. He wanted to climb up and get it, but Katie reminded him that it was somebody's house, and they would miss it. It was at that moment that Mom brought out a pie that she'd baked that morning. It was still a little warm, and she asked Katie and Orbie to take it over to the new neighbors who had just moved in across the street. Katie checked for cars. Orbie carried the pie very carefully, even though, as you can imagine, the delicious smell made it hard for him to concentrate. As they stood on the doorstep, Katie said that she hoped the new neighbors had kids. Then they could have new friends. Adults were terrific, but they were not always as much fun. Orbie thought everybody could be friends. Soon, a woman opened the door. She was older than Mom. Katie and Orbie held out the pie together and gave her their very best "Welcome to the neighborhood" smile. The woman loved the pie and said apple was Vincent's favorite. Orbie beamed at Katie. If they liked the pie, they must like Katie and Orbie. Just then a man came to the door and peeked out at Katie and Orbie from behind the woman. He introduced himself. His name was Vincent, and his wife's name was Adele. Vincent oohed and awed over the delicious pie, and he told them he was going to enjoy it. He'd only share it with his wife if she was good. Adele laughed, and Vincent winked at them. Katie thought he was a lot like her dad. Maybe they could all be friends. Katie asked if they had any children. Vincent smiled and put his arm around Adele. They had 2 children. Katie and Orbie were delighted. Hooray! Tooted Orbie. They like children. Adele said that their kids were actually old enough to be mommies and daddies themselves. In fact, some of them did have children. Adele and Vincent had 3 grandchildren altogether. Katie and Orbie smiled and looked at each other. Anybody with 3 grandchildren had to like children. Then Vincent said when their grandchildren came to visit that he hoped Katie and Orbie would come and play with them. His eyes twinkled, and he told the 2 friends that he was sure his grandchildren would like to play with them, and he was sure that they'd come and visit often. Everybody laughed. Adele thanked Katie and Orbie for the scrum-delicious pie. She told them as soon as all the boxes were put away, she would invite their family over for a visit. As Katie and Orbie looked both ways and then crossed the street, Katie told her friend that Vincent and Adele were terrific. Too bad they were grown-up new friends. Orbie agreed that you couldn't really play with grown-up friends. Katie looked at him and sighed. That was true. Well, except on special occasions. As they entered the house, they had no idea how wrong they could be. The next day, Katie and Orbie were in their bedroom, playing a game of Get the Marble in the Pot, when the doorbell rang. Katie looked out the window to see who it was. Nobody was there. As Katie turned away from the window, she saw an envelope on the ground. Well, the friends almost spun around each other as they raced to find out what was in it. When they both tried to grab the envelope, it swirled up in the air, and Orbie had to do a triple spin and a flip to catch it before the wind took it away. The envelope had their names on it. Katie took it to Mom, who told her to go ahead and rip it open. Katie did, and inside she found a thank you card. It was when she opened it up that they got the best surprise. 2 funny pictures slid out. One was of Katie and one was of Orbie. On the card was written, to our two new friends. Mom told Katie and Orbie it looked as though they'd made new friends who were adults. She also told Katie and Orbie that Vincent was a very famous sculptor and artist. The pictures he had drawn of them were very special. Katie looked at hers. It made her look kind of funny, and she laughed. Orbie's made him laugh, too. I have to tell you, they loved their pictures. Katie looked at them for a minute and turned to Orbie, and she said that maybe they could play with adult friends. And now she knew how. So did Orbie. With a spin and a jump, they were off. Mom was a little bit puzzled. A little later, Katie and Orbie hurried down the stairs with a big envelope and shot out the door. They giggled all the way to Vincent and Adele's pathway. Then, quietly, they placed their envelope outside the door. Katie rang the doorbell, and they raced and hid behind a bush at the front of Vincent's house. When Vincent opened the door, he saw the big envelope. He heard some giggling, too, but he pretended that he didn't. He opened up the envelope with two pictures in it, took a good look at them, and laughed. He called Adele, and she came to the door, and Vincent held out a funny picture of her. She laughed, too, and said it was just wonderful. The giggling from the bush was getting louder. Vincent told Adele he was delighted they'd bought a house with a giggling bush. Katie and Orbie jumped up and said, "Boo!" and everybody laughed. Adele brought out a container of juice and some paper cups. On the front steps of Vincent's new house, they enjoyed a drink of juice. Vincent told Katie and Orbie he and Adele were going to love being their friends. Orbie tooted, and Katie said that they were going to love being their new friends, too. As a matter of fact, they loved it already. And I hope you remember that you never know who will turn out to be your next friend. You just have to find a way to make it happen. And I know you're already very good at that. Just look at all of the friends you've made so far.
Did you know? Did you know? Did you know? Did you know? Goats are fascinating animals. Some kinds of goats live on farms, and others live high up in the mountains. Some have short fur, and others have great thick coats. There's even a kind of goat who faints whenever it gets scared. What a silly Billy.